We were having dinner when the accident happened. There was a huge crash and rumble. I can vividly remember feeling a scraping sensation. Within seconds, the dining room went into total darkness. The glass and the plates were shattering. There was quite a distinct list at the time. It took a few minutes after that for the emergency generator to kick in, so there was light again in the dining room. We thought, well, whatever it is was stable and settled. But it was seconds later when this was repeated and there was instability and panic. We were sitting on the bottom level of a 3-tier dining room. The plates were falling and the bottles of wine. My first memory was a full bottle of wine falling on me, and we scrambled under the table to shelter ourselves from falling glass. There was food and wine and drinks all over everybody. This was the peak of the dinner time, and thousands of guests were being served. There was china, food, debris, and glassware falling down from higher levels. We crawled our way to the shelter of the second level. There was total darkness, and then the lights flickered. Then an announcement came on saying there was an electrical problem, but everything is under control, and please do not panic. They would notify us of the next steps. There was no direction. The staff didn't know what was going on. They were ill-informed. Everyone was just panicking and rushing and dashing to where nobody knew. Everybody was scrambling. There was a call for everyone to go to the 4th level, and we were on the 3rd level. There was huge congestion trying to get out an open doorway. Such an angle, and people were wearing evening gowns and high-heeled shoes. Bodies were flying down the hallways, and people were crashing into walls. There were people being trampled and others holding a broken arm or a bleeding face. They were really strong, thrusting movements, and we were being thrown around. It was really difficult to walk. Water was coming down the hallways, and people were scrambling for the handrails and sliding down the passages. Doors were being flung off the hinges. Huge chandeliers and crystal all over the boat. There was glass everywhere. It was a horror story. By the time we got out onto the deck, there were lifeboats in the ocean, but the lifeboats were full. People were jumping over the rail, landing on top of the lifeboats or on top of the other people. There was just no space, but they needed to get off the ship. It was just absolute chaos.
This was a dramatic recreation of a CBC interview with Andrea Davis of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She and her husband Lawrence were aboard the cruise ship Costa Concordia on the night of January 13, 2012. They survived the chaos and panic after the ship was inexplicably taken too close to shore and partially capsized. The Costa Concordia, today, on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, Tales of Mishaps, Misfortune, and Misadventure. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. An estimated 36 million people will go on cruises in 2024, and this number is trending upward every year. Cruises appeal to many people for the variety of entertainment and dining on board, organized activities and games, exploring each port of call, or simply the romance of the open sea. Whether it is a honeymoon or anniversary, birthday, or just a badly needed getaway, a cruise can offer an escape from everyday life. Since the first cruise ship hit the water in the year 1900, cruise ships have gotten increasingly larger and more luxurious, each cruise line trying to keep up with the other. As of 2024, Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas is the world's largest cruise ship, with a capacity for 7,600 passengers and 2,350 crew. With so many people on board, safety must always be the number one concern. This, apparently, was not the case with the Costa Concordia. The Costa Concordia was an Italian cruise ship, owned and operated by Costa Crociere, and built by Fincantieri Shipbuilding Company at Sestre Ponente, Yard 6122, in Genoa, Italy. Costa Crociere has been in operation since 1948, but its origins date back to 1854, when Giacomo Costa began trading in olive oil and textiles. The company eventually reorganized as a passenger line company following World War II, and became a wholly owned subsidiary of the Carnival Corporation in the year 2000. The Costa Concordia cruise ship was the first in its class, followed by her sister ships Costa Serena, Costa Pacifica, Costa Favoloso, Costa Fascinosa, and the Carnival Splendor. As built, she was 247 meters long, 35.5 meters wide, and weighed in at just over 114,000 tons. The Costa class of ships were among the largest Italian-built cruise ships until the Carnival Dream class entered service in 2009. Built for the Italian cruising market, she had capacity for 3,780 passengers. With two main engines and two fixed-pitch propellers, the ship could reach a maximum speed of 21.5 knots, with electricity provided by diesel-electric generator. The vessel was launched at Sestre Ponente on the 2nd of September 2005. Czech model and actress Eva Herzegova had the honors of christening the ship. However, the champagne bottle failed to break when she swung it against the ship's steel hull on her first attempt. As is known, this is a bad omen for a ship. The vessel was delivered on the 30th of June 2006 at a cost of 450 million euros, about 372 million pounds or $570 US. The name Concordia, meaning harmony in Latin, was chosen to express the company's wish for continuing harmony, unity, and peace between European nations. The ship was comfortable and classy, with 13 public decks, each named for a European country or region, and one of the largest exercise facilities aboard any ship. Passenger accommodations included 1,500 cabins and 58 suites, some with private balconies and direct access to the Samara Spa. This was a two-level, 64,600 square foot facility, with a gymnasium, a therapeutic pool, sauna, Turkish bath, and a solarium. For recreation, the ship offered 4 swimming pools, 2 of which with retractable roofs, 5 jacuzzis, 5 spas, and a poolside movie theater on the main pool deck. The ship featured entertainment for both adults and children with a 3-level theater, casino, disco, a children's area with games and a basketball court, a Grand Prix motor racing simulator, and an internet cafe. Dining options included 5 onboard restaurants, with the upscale Club Concordia and Samsara restaurants requiring reservations. Other accommodations for adults included 13 bars, a cigar and cognac bar, and a coffee and chocolate bar. She was put into service for weekly Mediterranean cruises out of Savona, Italy, with regular ports of call at Toulon, Barcelona, Mallorca, Cagliari, Palermo, and Civitavecchia. While a minimum crew of 75 were required, the Costa Concordia often employed over 1,000 crew members. This included 39 officers, 77 deck crew, 58 engine crew, 581 hotel service staff, and 268 complementary services staff. In command of the vessel was Captain Francesco Schettino, an experienced mariner whose family had deep maritime roots. He attended Nino Bixio Nautical Institute and afterwards joined the Tirrenia Ferry Company. He signed on with Costa Crociere in 2002, at the age of 41, first as a security officer before working his way up to chief mate. In 2006, he was promoted to captain and given command of the newly launched Costa Concordia. The new cruise ship made her maiden voyage on the 14th of July, 2006, and provided comfort, fun, and pleasure to its passengers. But the ship experienced its first incident on November 22, 2008, while putting into port at Palermo, Sicily. Strong winds in the harbor pushed the ship into the dock, and the vessel sustained damage to its bow and hull. The damage was repaired within a month, but dents and scrapes were still visible. No injuries were reported as a result of this incident. At 7:18 p.m. on January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia departed the port of Civitavecchia, the primary port serving Rome, on her usual 7-night cruise. On board were 3,206 passengers, including almost 1,000 Italians, hundreds each of French, British, Russians, Americans, and Germans. Also on board were 1,023 crew members from 38 different countries, including 294 Filipinos, 202 Indians, 169 Indonesians, and 149 Italians. In total, 4,229 people departed for Salvano. The ship set a course to the northwest, along the west-central coast of Italy, into the Tyrrhenian Sea. This was a route the Costa Concordia and Captain Schettino had taken many times before during its weekly cruises. The usual planned route from Civitavecchia to Salvano was along the coast, and to navigate in the 7-mile-wide channel between the small Tuscan island of Giglio and the peninsula of Argentario. According to the Voyage Data Recorder, or VDR, at 9:03 p.m., as the ship approached the island of Giglio, a series of course changes were made, directing the ship closer to the island and Porto Giglio. Captain Schettino intended to do a sail-by salute, or incinos in Italian. This is performed by cruise ships for a variety of reasons, including advertising and promoting the cruise line to onshore vacationers, to impress the guests on board, to honor a crew member or family member, or as a tribute to a significant person on shore. Schettino explained later this course deviation was requested by the restaurant manager, who was a native of Giglio Island, and as a salute to the captain's mentor, who was a resident of the island. The deviation was discussed with the second mate, who plotted the new course. This changing course and why it was performed would become a critical point in the investigation to come. At approximately 9:30 p.m., the Costa Concordia approached the island from the southeast at a speed of 15.6 knots. The VDR recorded a phone conversation at 9:37 p.m. between Captain Schettino and an unknown person, and Schettino was told to stay at least 0.4 miles from the island. The captain then issued an order with coordinates to the helmsman and set a radar distance of 0.5 miles. At this time, Schettino took over command of the watch on the bridge from the first officer and ordered the helmsman to change the heading from 290 degrees to 300. In other words, a slight turn to the north. He also ordered speed increase to 16 knots. Then came a series of more course changes, from the captain to the helmsman, along with a bit of confusion. At 9:41, the captain ordered in English a heading of 325 degrees. The helmsman replied to confirm, 315. The first officer then intervened to correct the helmsman, but incorrectly said 335. The captain repeated his order of 325, and the helmsman then confirmed 325. In approximately 30-second intervals, the captain ordered 330 degrees, then 335, and finally 340, continuing a starboard turn to the north. At about 9:44, he ordered a heading of 350 degrees, and the helmsman replied 340, prompting the captain to repeat his order of 350, clarifying, "To starboard, or we will end up on the rocks." The ship was now only 0.3 miles from La Scola Islands, about a half mile off its intended course. Captain Schettino then gave another series of commands, this time rudder commands, in quick succession. Starboard 10, starboard 20, hard to starboard. In those 30 seconds, the ship had moved to be just 150 meters from La Scola. The captain then called out port 10, but the helmsman only performed a move to port 5. Schettino then shouted port 20, but the helmsman, in error, went to starboard, before correcting his mistake. At 9:45 p.m., the captain ordered hard to port, and at the same time on the port side of the vessel, the second officer reported the ship had grounded. Just a second later, loud screeching was heard, and the Costa Concordia's hull on the port side struck a rocky outcropping. The jagged rocks ripped a large hole in the ship's hull, allowing the ocean water to enter the lower deck. The ship immediately began taking on water and listing to port. When the water reached the engine room, the ship lost propulsion. The vessel's speed decreased to 8.3 knots and was drifting helplessly to the north, with a list to port. Captain Schettino ordered all watertight doors shut, and for the helmsman to move the rudder to the center. The ship's VDR recorded that the ship was experiencing a blackout, with no power to the pumps or the rudder. The ship was now drifting aimlessly and sinking. A minute later, the emergency generator started up and began powering the ship. But this sign of hope was dashed, as after just 41 seconds, the generator failed. Emergency batteries provided power, but only for lighting and communication systems. All officers rushed to the bridge and found alarms going off for multiple system failures. At 9:51 p.m., the crew reported water in 2 adjacent compartments, with the engine room, the main switchboard, and the emergency switchboard flooded. At 9:55 p.m., a ship-wide announcement was made, stating the ship was experiencing a blackout. Passengers were told that the situation was under control, and technicians were working to restore power as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Giuseppe Pilone reported to the captain that at least 3 compartments were flooded, and power could not be restored. Schettino then had his first communication with authorities on shore. He contacted the Costa Fleet Crisis Coordinator in Civitavecchia and reported his ship had struck some rocks. He said he was experiencing a blackout, with water entering through the port side, affecting the electrical panels. But this communication was not clear, and the crisis coordinator believed the flooded electrical panel was in a different compartment of the ship. This was passed on to a technical advisor who was under the impression the ship still had propulsion. He advised the captain to navigate into shallower water, drop anchor, and assess the damage. This, of course, was not possible. Due to the wind from the north, strong currents, and the ship's stuck rudder position, the ship turned around and made about a 180-degree loop and headed back to the southwest toward Giglio Island. Once the ship had turned, it developed a list to starboard, most likely from the incoming water shifting inside the hull from the momentum of turning. A few minutes later, at 10:07 p.m., the ship was contacted by the harbor master at the Civitavecchia operation room, and Captain Schettino reported that the Costa Concordia had only lost power. Meanwhile, the first officer and chief engineer continued inspecting the ship, and they discovered a leak in one of the watertight doors. The location of this door meant that at least 4 compartments were flooded, instead of 3. These were compartments 4, 5, 6, and 7. Coast Guard Petty Officer Alessandro Tosi in Livorno spoke to an unidentified officer of the Costa Concordia at 10:12 p.m., and he was only told of a blackout due to a blown generator. No other information was communicated. On the ship, passengers were still being told everything was under control, and they should return to their cabins. At 10:18 p.m., the crew in the engine room reported a complete loss of automation. Balancing pumps, bilge pumps, and all other systems were non-functional. By this time, the ship was practically motionless, moving at only 0.3 knots and drifting to the southwest. Captain Schettino contacted the crisis coordinator again and reported 2 compartments flooded, the diesel generators non-functional, and no propulsion. He also reported that the ship would still float with 2 flooded compartments. Finally, at 10:22 p.m., the Italian Coast Guard was contacted. 2 tugs were requested, and the Coast Guard was informed the ship's hull had been breached. However, accurate information about the flooded compartments, the power failure, and the list to starboard were not communicated. The situation was under control, they said, and the problems are being assessed. Nothing yet had been reported to anyone about the well-being of the passengers. Just 4 minutes later at 10:26, the captain contacted the company again, this time reporting accurate details and the seriousness of the situation. Following this call, Chief Engineer Pilone reported to Schettino that the onboard communication system and the fire control systems were offline, and he recommended to abandon ship. Pilone also asked for the crew in the engine room located on Deck 0, the lowest deck, to be permitted to leave the area, as the flooding was threatening their safety. Captain Schettino said no, that they should wait. But just a minute later, the safety officer gave the engine crew permission to leave, and the crew left the engine room and moved up to Deck 4. By this time, a search and rescue boat, a police boat, Coast Guard helicopter, and the passenger ship Igilium were converging to assist. With the situation growing more dire, Schettino then gave the order to sound the general alarm, indicating a serious emergency. All passengers were then ordered to report to the lifeboat stations on Deck 4. Some of the junior officers and other crew were frustrated by the inaction of Captain Schettino, and began helping passengers board lifeboats before the order was given. The ship was contacted by the Leghorn Coast Guard Station, and Schettino reported a severe list and the ship was in distress. At 10:36 p.m., the station operator issued the distress call and for search and rescue units to be deployed. The ship then used its Inmarsat-C communication device to issue a distress signal. At 10:40 p.m., the Costa Concordia was lying on its starboard side in shallow water on a rocky ledge on the east coast of Giglio Island. The first officer and second officer urged Captain Schettino to give the order to abandon ship, but he hesitated. The second officer then ordered the starboard lifeboats to be prepared, and at 10:50, Schettino ordered lifeboats 1, 3, 5, and 7 to be launched. At 10:51, he told the bridge to issue the abandoned ship order, but then told the second mate to use the words, "Let passengers on shore" instead. At 10:54 p.m., the second mate issued the PA system to announce, in English, "Abandon ship." Fearful passengers only became more excited. Passengers in the dining room were showered by falling glass. Chandeliers, silverware, china, and wine bottles littered the scene. Frightened guests pushed and shoved to find an exit, and they slipped down passageways and stairs. Injuries were many, including broken bones, cuts, and bruises. The staff of the Costa Concordia did not know anything more than the passengers. Over 600 passengers had just boarded at Civitavecchia, but they did not receive the mandatory lifeboat drill. Among much confusion, starboard lifeboats were launched, but with much difficulty due to the listing of the ship. The portside lifeboats were unavailable. The lifeboats filled quickly. Many who were left on board jumped into the water to get off the ship. Some of them landed hard on top of the lifeboats, and others landed on top of people already in the water. Reportedly, 3 people drowned after jumping overboard, and scores more were injured, 7 critically. The first lifeboat arrived on Giglio Island at 11:15 p.m. Evacuation efforts were complicated due to the severe list of the ship. Some passengers were trapped inside and unable to get to the lifeboats. Others were even clinging to the sides of the stricken ship. Life rafts from the rescue ships were brought to the ship and began taking stranded and struggling passengers to the island. At 11:15 p.m., Captain Schettino ordered his officers to take all the radios and to leave the bridge. By 11:19, the bridge was abandoned except for the second officer, who was left in charge of coordinating the evacuation. The second officer's last communication was at 11:32 p.m., when he too abandoned the bridge. The officers boarded a lifeboat and made it to shore at 11:40 p.m. While the majority of passengers had already disembarked, Captain Schettino and the other officers abandoned their ship with over 300 passengers remaining on board, some of them injured, and some were already dead. This would later become a critical issue for Captain Schettino. When the captain was spotted on shore, word spread quickly, including through local media outlets. It was clear to all eyewitnesses, including hundreds of local residents who were on scene to assist, that passengers were still on board and in the water after jumping overboard. Life rafts and helicopters continued to arrive on shore with passengers as the rescue operation continued. At midnight on January 14th, the ship lurched and listed even further to starboard, putting it in danger of sliding off the rocky ledge. By 12:36 a.m., 80 people still remained on board. At 12:42 a.m., Captain Schettino began communicating with Italian Coast Guard Commander Gregorio DiFalco in Livorno. The conversation was on and off for almost an hour. The following conversation is taken from the official transcript, translated into English and voiced by actors.
This is DiFalco speaking from Livorno. Am I speaking with the commander?
Yes, good evening, Commander DiFalco.
Please tell me your name.
I'm Commander Schettino.
Schettino? Listen, Schettino, there are people trapped on board. Now you go with your boat under the prow on the starboard side. There's a pilot ladder. You will climb that ladder and go on board. You go on board and then you will tell me how many people there are. Is that clear? I'm recording this conversation, Commander Schettino.
Commander, let me tell you one thing.
Speak up. Put your hand in front of the microphone and speak more loudly. Is that clear?
In this moment, the boat is tipping.
I understand that. Listen, there are people that are coming down the pilot ladder of the prow. You go up that pilot ladder, get on the ship, and tell me how many people are still on board. You need to tell me if there are children, women, or people in need of assistance, and tell me the exact number of each of these categories. Is that clear? Listen, Schettino, that you saved yourself from the sea, but I'm going to make you look bad. I'm going to make you pay for this. Go on board, damn it.
Commander, please.
No, please. You now get up and go on board. They're telling me on board that there are still...
I'm here with the rescue boats. I am here. I am not going anywhere. I am here.
What are you doing, Commander?
I'm here to coordinate the rescue.
What are you coordinating there? Go on board. Coordinate the rescue from aboard the ship. Are you refusing?
No, I am not refusing.
Are you refusing to go on board, Commander? Can you tell me the reason why you are not going?
I am not going because the other lifeboat is stopped.
You go aboard. It is an order. Don't make any more excuses. You have declared abandoned ship. Now I am in charge. You go on board. Is that clear? Do you hear me? Go and call me when you're on board. Air rescue crew is there.
Where are your rescuers?
My air rescue crew is on the prow. Go. There are already bodies, Schettino.
How many bodies are there?
I don't know. I have heard of one. You are the one who has to tell me how many there are. Christ!
But do you realize it's dark here and we can't see anything?
And so what? Do you want to go home, Schettino? It is dark and you want to go home? Get on the prow of that boat using the pilot ladder and tell me what can be done. How many people there are and what their needs are. Now!
I am with my second in command.
So both of you go up then. You and your second go on board now. Is that clear?
Commander, I want to go on board, but it is simply that the other boat here, there are other rescuers. It is stopped and is waiting.
It has been an hour that you've been telling me the same thing. Now go on board, and tell me immediately how many people there are there.
Okay, Commander.
Go immediately.
Captain Schettino never returned to the Costa Concordia. Rescue efforts continued through the early morning hours. At 2:53 a.m., patrol boat G-104 of the Guardia di Finanza arrived on scene, and its crew boarded the Costa Concordia. They searched the ship and found approximately 50 people still on board. Fire Chief Ennio Aquilino from the provincial capital of Grosseto reported rescuing approximately 100 people from the water and about 60 from the ship. 3 bodies had been recovered by this time, that of 2 French passengers and a Peruvian crew member. By 6:14 a.m., 30 people remained on board, and rescue efforts continued throughout the weekend. A Korean couple were pulled from their cabin, uninjured, on early Sunday morning, as well as safety officer Marico Giampietroni, who suffered a broken leg. Of the 4,229 people on board, 4,197 were rescued. Captain Schettino and 5 other officers were placed into custody and held for questioning. By January 22nd, 9 days after the wreck, 30 people were confirmed to be dead. 26 passengers and 4 of the crew. 2 people remained missing. One of those was Grazia Treccarichi. Her husband, Elio Vincenzi, was not with his wife on the ship, as the cruise was a 50th birthday gift from their daughter. In September of 2013, Vincenzi sorrowfully recalled, "After the Concordia hit the reef, my wife and my daughter were calmly lining up to get on a lifeboat. Then she realized their cabin was on the same bridge, not too far from there. She was wearing a nightgown, and it was a freezing January night. So she told my daughter she would pop into the room to grab a jacket and would be back soon. I don't know what happened next. I will never know. Yesterday I was taken around the starboard side on a boat and realized the coast was only a few feet away. My wife was a good swimmer, so I think she must have been hit unconscious by falling debris from the upper decks. Sometimes I wonder if she has been swept out to sea by the currents and will never be found again." In October of 2014, Gracia's body was found by salvage divers inside the wreck of the Costa Concordia, Vincenzi's daughter, Stefania, and her boyfriend survived the ordeal. A few weeks later, the last missing victim was found. Russell Rebello, from India, was a member of the waitstaff of the Costa Concordia. His body was found in a passenger cabin, on Deck 8, on November 3, 2014. In the aftermath of the accident, Captain Schettino was the focus of much criticism. On Sunday, January 15th, just 2 days after the accident, accusations came fast and furious. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation stated that Captain Schettino abandoned the vessel, quote, well before the last passengers were evacuated, in violation of international codes. Schettino was released from jail and placed under house arrest by Italian authorities on January 17, 2012. On July 5th, he was removed from house arrest, but ordered to stay in the city of Meta di Sorrento. As the details of the accident spread through the news media, public outrage increased, as did blame for Captain Schettino. Media outlets called him Captain Coward and Captain Calamity. The ship's owner, Costa Crociere, accused Captain Schettino of having made, quote, errors of judgment, and failed to follow emergency procedures. Senior executive Pier Luigi Foschi described the error as inexplicable, and added, this route was put in correctly. The fact that it left from this course is due solely to a maneuver by the commander that was unapproved, unauthorized, and unknown to Costa. On January 19th, passenger Angelo Fabri claimed that he and his wife observed Captain Schettino having dinner with a young, beautiful blonde woman the night of the accident. The woman turned out to be Domnica Cemortan of Moldova, a dancer and employee of Costa Crociere. Schettino, who was married, was tested for the presence of drugs and alcohol immediately after the accident, and the results were negative. He either was not drinking at all or did not drink enough to show up on the tests. In February of 2013, over a year after the accident, multiple charges of manslaughter were officially filed against Captain Schettino, as well as charges for causing a maritime accident, abandoning ship with passengers still on board, and lack of cooperation with rescue operations. 5 other Costa employees were also charged. Crisis Director Roberto Ferrarini, Cabin Service Director Manrico Giampendroni, First Officer Ciro Ambrosio, Third Officer Silvia Cornica, and Helmsman Jacob Rusli Bin of Indonesia. The 5 officers were granted plea bargains and received sentences of 2 years and 10 months in prison for multiple manslaughter charges, negligence, and causing the shipwreck. But Captain Schettino's request for a plea deal was denied, and his trial began in June of 2014. Schettino's lawyers argued that he was being made a scapegoat, and there were others responsible, including the helmsman and the Coast Guard. His attorney, Daniela Boccellini, stated, Schettino is now the only defendant, but he is not the only one responsible. He's not responsible for the lifeboats that couldn't be launched, nor for the failing emergency generators. His attorneys put blame on the helmsman, Jacob Rusli Bin, saying he did not speak or understand English, and this caused confusion, delays, and errors in the ship's navigation. Rusli Bin had returned to Indonesia by this time and could not be located to testify at the trial. Junior Officer Stefano Iannelli testified that Captain Schettino exclaimed, "What have I done? I'm finished sailing," after crashing into the rocks. Of key importance to the case was Schettino's decision to do a sail-by salute. The captain admitted this was not part of the planned course, and he did not inform the company of his intention to make this maneuver. Schettino testified in court, saying, "I wanted to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Pay homage to the island and a retired commander living there, give passengers another experience, and do a favor for the maitre d', who was from Giglio." His defense argued that these salutes were commonplace in the industry, and in fact had been performed many times. Residents of Giglio agree, with one telling German news agency Der Spiegel, "It is not a new trend, instead it's an old seaman's custom. When there weren't any mobile phones, the seafarers could greet their families this way if they lived along the coast or in a harbor." Schettino was also questioned about the presence of Domnica Cemortan and the nature of his relationship with her. Both the captain and Miss Cemortan testified under oath and admitted to dining together, and then going to the bridge after dinner. The Telegraph newspaper reported, Miss Cemortan refused at least 3 times to answer the question of whether she and the 53-year-old married commander had had a relationship, prompting Giovanni Pugliatti, the judge, to threaten her with criminal proceedings unless she told the truth. The hearing had to be suspended while Miss Cemortan's lawyer explained to her the gravity of refusing to testify. After the hearing reconvened, Miss Cemortan reluctantly admitted to prosecuting lawyer Michalina Suriana that she had been having an affair with the captain, telling the court in Moldovan, "Yes, I had a relationship with him." Prosecutors say the presence of the dancer on the bridge that night distracted Captain Schettino and contributed to the accident, which cost the lives of 32 people. Regarding Miss Cemortan being an unticketed passenger, she told the court, "When you are someone's lover, no one asks you for a ticket." She defended Schettino, adding, "It wasn't the captain who made the mistake. He knew what he was doing. His orders were clear. But the last officer in the chain of command misunderstood to the point he had to repeat it." Another important inquiry was the timing of his departure from the ship. Schettino testified that he lost his balance on the listing ship and essentially fell uncontrollably into a lifeboat. In rebuttal, the prosecution played the audio recording of his conversation with Captain DiFalco of the Coast Guard. Officer Iannelli, in his testimony, contradicted the captain's claim, saying, "I jumped onto the roof of the lifeboat, but Schettino was already there. He had jumped just before me." As for the manslaughter charges, Schettino's lawyers claimed he was not responsible and had no choice but to delay the order to abandon ship. Lead attorney for the defense, Domenico Pepe, told the court, "Stop for a minute to consider what would have happened if he had abandoned ship 1 kilometer from shore. There could be 4,500 dead, not 32. Pepe blamed the faulty machinery of the ship for the deaths, and this was not in the control of the captain. In a desperate last gasp, he claimed a guilty charge against Captain Schettino would damage Italy's reputation. The lengthy trial was finally convened on February 11, 2015. Judge Giovanni Pugliatti read the verdict. Francesco Schettino was found guilty of all charges, and Pugliatti sentenced him with 10 years for manslaughter, 5 years for causing the wreck, and 1 year for abandoning his vessel before all passengers were safely off. The 16-year sentence outraged the public, who found it far too lenient. After an appeal, Schettino's sentence was upheld by the appeals court. A second appeal to the Italian Supreme Court also resulted in his sentence being upheld. On May 12, 2017, over 5 years after the Costa Concordia accident, Francesco Schettino turned himself in to the Rebibbia prison in Rome to begin serving his sentence. If he serves out his full sentence, he will be released in 2033 at age 73. The Costa Concordia remained in place, lying on its side off the coast of Giglio Island for 2 years. In April of 2013, efforts to refloat her began. Caissons were added to the port side for flotation, and underwater platforms were built to support the ship and prevent it from slipping off the ledge. In September of 2013, cables and pulleys were used to pull the port side outward and down to right the ship, a process called parbuckling. In July of 2014, the ship was carefully pulled into slightly deeper water, and more caissons were added to both sides of the ship. Pumps then began removing water from inside the hull. She then began her journey under tow, back to Genoa to be scrapped, with 14 escort ships, at a speed of just 2 knots. She arrived at her final destination a few weeks later, and scrapping work was performed for the next 3 years, being completed in July of 2017 at an estimated cost of $2 billion. In January of 2012, just following the accident, Costa Crociere offered any uninjured passengers £11,000 per person in compensation, return of all personal belongings to the extent possible, plus travel expenses related to the voyage. About 1/3 of these passengers accepted this offer, with many choosing to file independent lawsuits. The crew received a minimum of 2 months' pay and reimbursement for expenses and personal property loss up to £2,250. For those who were injured, and to the families of the dead and missing, the company offered individual settlements based on their circumstances. that's going to do it for the Costa Concordia. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to voice actors Alan Nail, who voiced Captain Schettino, Marwan Saidi, who voiced Captain Gregorio DiFalco, and to my wife, Dawn Napolitano, for voicing Andrea Davis. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. If you would like to support the show, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/shipwreckspod, or you can subscribe to Into History, a collection of some of the best history podcasts available, including this one. Get ad-free access, bonus content, a private Discord community, and more at intohistory.com/shipwreckspod. You can follow the show on social media on Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at shipwreckspod. All episodes, show notes, and images are available at shipwrecksandseadogs.com, as well as merchandise. Original theme music is provided by Sean Siegfried, and you can find him at seansiegfried.com. Please join me again in 2 weeks. But until then, don't forget to wear your life jackets.